Alright, another month is over, let's just dive into it. This is everything I watched in June. I started off the month with Bad Boys Ride or Die. Honestly, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this franchise. I thought Bad Boys 1 was fine, I really like Bad Boys 2, and I thought Bad Boys 3 was kinda disappointing. But honestly, I had some decent fun with this one. There is a lot going on here, maybe verging on too much. It's the most reverential and referential of the entire franchise, paying homage to every single previous installment. It's the most direct sequel of the series, continuing the storyline of Mike Lowry figuring out that he has a son who's also a deadly assassin. And this movie also has to set up all of the new storylines and character arcs. And yet the movie never gets bogged down in the details, quickly and efficiently moving from one entertaining action or comedic set piece to the next. Yeah, that leaves some emotional beats and character arcs being given the short shrift, with the incredible Ray Seahorn being especially underused here, but it really gets the important stuff right. Martin Lawrence is possibly at his funniest in the entire franchise in this film, as the script completely flips the dynamic between Mike and Marcus to great comedic effect. The action from Adil and Bilal is big and fun, but I do wish that in trying to copy Michael Bay's style, they didn't bring in so much gloss and smoothness. So overall, it's a good time, and it really feels like they're trying to move this franchise in a Fast and Furious direction, and I'm not complaining. Then I watched The First Omen, which I missed in theaters, but had to check out on streaming after hearing pretty unanimous buzz about how great and overlooked this film was. And honestly, yeah, this thing rips. In terms of big studio horror movies, especially ones that are tied to popular franchises, this thing goes way harder and takes way more risks than pretty much anything else in recent memory. Honestly, if you're skeptical, just watch the opening scene and see the level that Arkasha Stevenson is working on. This film is genuinely beautiful, there are so many artfully put together shots and compositions, the surprises and thrills and set pieces are all super creative and visually interesting. My only real complaint is the script can occasionally drag in parts. The runtime is pretty much right at 2 hours, it feels slightly longer, but still a great movie. One of the most impressive mainstream horror films and certainly directing debuts I've seen in a very long time. Then I watched Hitman, which really feels like the coronation of Glenn Powell movie star. This film follows a nebbish college professor who works with the police as a variety of fake hitmen to catch criminals trying to commit murder. And then things get a little complicated when he falls in love with one of the very suspects he was supposed to help arrest. This is a pure 80s throwback movie that's hard to pin down on any one specific genre. It's got some light comedic elements, it's dramatic, there's some thriller vibes, it's also really sexy and romantic. Glenn Powell is in pure A-list movie star charisma mode in this movie, and also pulls double duty, co-writing the script with director Richard Linklater. Honestly, the script is perfectly structured to the point that it's probably worthy of studying for aspiring screenwriters, and so clearly tailored to allow Powell to display his wide array of acting strengths. And then there's his co-star Adria Arjona, who takes a potentially underwritten female lead and somehow elevates her so much she steals the movie. She's vulnerable and sultry and charming and funny and terrifying. It's a wild tightrope of a character and performance, and she just absolutely knocked it out of the park. The chemistry between Powell and Arjona is palpable, and this is the romantic comedy co-star that Powell should be hitching his career to, not Sydney Sweeney. I also want to highlight Austin Amelio, who turns in an extremely fun and memorable turn as a more antagonistic character. So yeah, Hitman is great, and hopefully in its success, we get a lot more of these lower mid-budget throwback movies in the future. Then I watched another very strong new horror entry, In a Violent Nature. This is a slasher movie told completely from the perspective of the killer, and basically just follows him around as he trudges through some woods and brutally murders anyone he comes across. There's not really any plot, and in some ways it feels like a similar meditative and contemplative tone as two standout dramas from last year, The Zone of Interest and Perfect Days, but I was a little worried going in at how that pace and tone would transfer to the horror genre. But honestly, I thought the conceit worked pretty well. I was captivated the entire time, and the premise really just helps elevate the senseless brutality of its central killer. And there's also some genuinely shocking, brutal, disgustingly incredible kills here. It feels like every time a new horror movie debuts at a film festival, there's reports of audience members passing out or throwing up due to the disgusting imagery on screen, and then inevitably I end up seeing it and thinking, that's it? Have those audience members seen literally any other horror movie before? But honestly, there's one kill in this that I think lives up to the hype. I literally went slack-jawed at the sheer audacity of what I was seeing on screen. So it's probably not for everyone, but if you're a fan of horror and want to try something new and inventive, then I highly recommend In a Violent Nature. And then I saw Inside Out 2, and I've gotta say, I was pretty disappointed. I'm a massive fan of the first Inside Out film. I consider it one of my favorite animated films of all time. It so perfectly and succinctly explores the complications of emotions in the human mind in ways that are profound and impactful to both children and adults. But with Inside Out 2, it really just feels like Pixar is treading in the same exact waters. It basically follows beat for beat the exact same plot structure as the first film, with some very light reskinning of new characters and terms, and presenting them as if they're new ideas. And as Inside Out 2 mines similar territory to the first film, it doesn't feel anywhere near as deep or creative or profound. It's a whole bunch of ideas I've already seen before, but told in a much more surface level way. There are moments of inspiration that I liked. Yes, I would consider turning this entire YouTube channel into one that's exclusively devoted to talking about Pouchy. And despite feeling pretty emotionally detached and unengaged throughout the first 2 acts, I did find the ending pretty effective. But for a film about the wonders of the human mind and the exploration of the complicated emotions and ideas that make us who we are, it somehow feels shockingly lifeless. And then I saw the Bikeriders, and as a fan of Jeff Nichols' previous work, I was pretty disappointed on this one too. It looks great, the cast is giving it their all, even with various over-the-top accents, but the script for this thing is kind of a mess. There are attempts at interesting thematic explorations that I found interesting but completely underdeveloped. It's a film about a group of guys who don't know how to be in touch with their emotions other than through the language of motorcycles. It's this toxic masculinity feeling of needing an excuse like a motorcycle club just to hang out with your bros. It tries to shine a light on all these supposed tough guys as they're trying to act a part that they think real men are supposed to play. But none of this is explored in a satisfying way. Explored even less is literally every single character in this movie. Jodie Comer is ostensibly the lead, whose narration fills literally half the film, and yet she's got no arc, no interiority, complexity, no nothing. Austin Butler's entire character just boils down to looking cool and riding bikes. Only Tom Hardy gets any semblance of an arc as a wannabe tough guy whose empire starts crumbling around him due to rapid expansion and mismanagement. But as the third lead of this film, it's not really enough to hold this thing together. Next up was Ghostlight, and it's one of my absolute favorite films of the year so far. It's about a working class father named Dan who is struggling with healthfully navigating and addressing his emotions amidst a trauma in his life. He resists counseling and just sort of bottles everything up to the detriment of himself and everyone else around him. We see how these repressed emotions impact his wife and his teenage daughter, who is acting out in her own different ways. But Dan finally finds an outlet in a community theater production of Romeo and Juliet. This is a movie about the ways that art and storytelling can be a cathartic release, about how acting can allow you a chance to not only be another person and momentarily escape your own life struggles, but also understand and empathize with people you wouldn't assume to have similar feelings as yourself. Storytelling is a universal language. It can bring people together. It can expand your understanding of not only other people, but also yourself. The central family in this film is also played by a real family, and you can feel that familial bond and comfortability with each other on screen, making everything feel all the more impactful and authentic. I found Ghostlight to be deeply moving and super charming, and there wasn't a dry eye in the theater. And sure, I was the only person in my theater, but the point remains. Great movie, highly recommended. And then I watched the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie Kinds of Kindness, which is actually an anthology of 3 different movies, all with the same excellent ensemble, with Jesse Plemons in particular as a standout. The first film is by far the strongest, exploring the unhealthy power dynamic created when trying to please someone in a higher position, the cynical and oppressive nature of living in a capitalist grind, but also the kind of kindness it can be to strip people away of all responsibility and, by extension, the burden of making choices and having free will. It's all told through Lanthimos' signature tone of treating the absurd deadly seriously. It's fantastic, but the second one I'm a little more mixed on. The tone actually veers even more absurd, and knowingly so, bordering on camp. It's also by far the funniest of the 3 parts, with some genuinely hilarious and inspired gags. But it's also the most thematically heavy, creating a very strange mesh of tones that I'm still trying to parse out. The third is solid, but as crazy as this may sound, this Yorgos Lanthimos film starring Willem Dafoe as the leader of a sex cult, searching for a quasi-messiah, plays it pretty safe. Maybe that feeling's just due to being compared to the shorts that came before it, or all of the other films in Yorgos Lanthimos' illustrious career. Or maybe it's just because by the time we get to the end of part 3, the entire film's runtime is crossing the 2.5-hour mark. Either way, the concluding story of Kinds of Kindness feels satisfying, but not extraordinary. And finally, something I watched last month but didn't get the chance to talk about, The Last Stop in Yuma County. I don't want to give too much away about the plot of this movie, and I can't emphasize enough how you absolutely should not watch the trailer if you intend to watch this movie. Just go in blind and be ready for a great time. I will say this is a kind of modern western that leans heavily into genre tropes and plays with audiences' expectations to really compelling and entertaining effect. It's mostly all in one location, but it keeps throwing in so many new characters and twists and variables to its equation, which just ratchets up the tension and intrigue. The cast are all incredible across the board, particularly Jim Cummings in the lead role. Jim also produced the movie, and if you're a fan of his writing and directing efforts like Thunder Road or Wolf of Snow Hollow, I think you're really gonna like this one. It's one of my favorite movies I've seen so far this year. Check it out. And that's it. That's everything I watched in June and one thing I watched in May. Let me know what you've been watching lately. What are you looking forward to watching? And follow me on Letterboxd at Josh D. Floyd for my real-time takes on everything I'm watching. Like this video, subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.